In 1930, the Society for the Study of Chinese Architecture was founded, a private research institution. It was funded by the China Education Fund and Zhu Qiqian himself. Historically and artistically, Chinese architecture is highly valuable. Today, the world is becoming increasingly interconnected. Things are developing rapidly. Before we can hold discussions with renowned foreign scholars, we must carry out scientific, systematic research. It is our urgent hope that all Chinese scholars will join us in this research. In 1931, Liang Sicheng became a member of the Society for the Study of Chinese Architecture. Another key figure who joined around the same time was Liu Dunjian, a graduate of the Tokyo Institute of Technology who was lecturing on architecture at Nanjing Central University. Such top academics, as well as politicians and financiers, were attracted to the society thanks to Zhu Qiqian's effort. Before long, it was exerting a powerful influence.
中国古代建筑文化是一个非常悠久的一个传统，但是呢，古代人呢，对它没有进行过很科学的研究。为什么中国的古建筑跟外国的西方古建筑是不一样？什么原因？弄不清楚。为什么中国建筑有那么大的屋顶？弄不清楚。为什么建筑屋顶上还有那么多装饰？也不清楚。甚至于名词都闹不清楚。
And Liang, as you know, his concern when he came to the West and studied all the periods of historic architecture from the West, which are very highly documented and recorded, and you could look at the plans and the elevations of all of these buildings from the beginning. He lamented the fact that there was nothing like that in China, that there was no history, that emperors, when a new dynasty came in, they tended to destroy everything, any records from the old dynasty or whatever. So there wasn't a Western history of Chinese building. And so he, I think, determined as a student that he would try to correct that.
The question facing Liang Sicheng was where to begin.
选择眼前的紫禁城、故宫。 那时候的营造学社的地址啊，就在这外朝房，就是在端门跟午门中间，就现在的国旗班那个地方。故宫是清代的，清代有部分折立，还有一些老工匠留下，这就造成了一个很容易学习的这么一个条件。
By talking to old craftsmen with stories to tell about Beijing, Liang Sicheng could start uncovering the historical secrets of Chinese architecture.
屋顶有什么样子？屋顶底下为什么叫斗拱？斗拱是什么样？柱子为什么叫有檐柱、有金柱？一点一点拿着书请教工匠，一点对一点对，弄清楚了，慢慢弄清楚了，入门了。
In 1932, Lin Huiyin wrote an article entitled Several Features of Chinese Architecture. In it, she stated, Chinese architecture is the most prominently autonomous system in the East, which has ancient origins and a simple evolution, and which has been passed down through generations in a continuous line. Moreover, the basic structures have not been subject to outside influences. Later on, Chinese architecture developed rapidly in terms of structure and art, and appeared to be simple and unsophisticated, but it was generally believed to be crude and underdeveloped, and inferior to foreign architecture. There is little praise abroad for the contribution made by Chinese architecture. We Chinese architects must do our utmost in our research aimed at dispelling foreign people's understanding of Chinese architecture. In 1934, Liang Sicheng published the first volume of his Practices in Qing-style architecture. The introduction was written by Lin Huiyin. The book presented only a tiny part of the huge amount of research they were striving to complete on the history of Chinese architecture. But as Liang Sicheng's own research gradually made progress, he became increasingly aware of the huge strides being taken by foreign scholars interested in the history of Chinese architecture. The earliest scholar to write about Chinese architecture had been the 18th century British architect and member of the Royal Academy, William Chambers. After travelling around China, Chambers wrote designs of Chinese buildings, furniture, dresses, machines, and utensils. Subsequently, the Swedish art historian Oswald Sicheng wrote The Walls and Gates of Peking. The French sinologist Edouard Chavard, Archaeological Notes from North China. And the German architect Ernst Borschmann, Picturesque China, Architecture and Landscape. The publication of these works produced an upsurge in interest in China and sinology throughout Europe.
But they didn't really study the buildings. But I think they made a very important contribution on Liang Sicheng. Perhaps the major contribution of these people was their photography. And I think this was an awakening for Liang to come to the United States and say, foreigners have come to my country and photographed buildings in my country that my own people don't know about. Now it's time for China to understand this as Chinese.
Scholars in Japan were also making considerable progress in their studies of Chinese architecture, and their success spurred Liang Sicheng on in his own research. For the inauguration ceremony of the Society for the Study of Chinese Architecture, Zhu Jiqian invited several Japanese scholars. They included the man known as the father of Japanese architecture, Ito Chuta. By the 19th century, to describe the development of world architecture, Western scholars had devised a tree design. The trunk was Greco-Roman architecture, and Chinese and Japanese architecture were merely branches. Scholars in Japan were angry, and yet Japan's own architectural tradition had originated in China. However, everything changed in the middle of the 19th century with the Meiji Restoration, when the country flung its doors wide open.
外国人来了，西洋人来了，认为日本的东西，寺庙什么东西非常爱好。有些人就把寺庙卖给外国人。后来因为日本人慢慢知道有价值。
That is the main reason Japanese government realized we have to do something about to protect our culture.
In 1896, Japan established its Ancient Shrines and Temples Preservation Society. The following year, the Ancient Shrines and Temples Preservation Law was introduced and a nationwide survey of ancient relics was launched. The 1,200-year-old wooden Horyuji Temple in Nara Prefecture was discovered and listed as a national treasure. Japan, despite a general commitment to being less Asian and more European, retained a powerful sense of national pride, and a number of scholars made it their mission to research their country's history and promote its culture.
We have to thank to those particular two persons who started to study about the history of Japanese arts, and also particularly Ito Chuta and other scholars who started to study on Japanese architecture. Those particular scholars started to pay attention to its Japanese own history in the field of arts and architecture.